welcome back. So we're still on the RICE framework right now, but we want to talk about effort and constraints, okay, and how that ties into this last part of the RICE framework. All right, so we went over effort a little bit in the last video where we have those two common methodologies for assessing effort or categorizing effort, I should say. So you have the t-shirt test of small, medium, large, and assigning a value or a value range to those in terms of time it takes to develop that thing. Or you can use a Likert scale, such as the 1 through 5 scale, and assign a time range to each of those numbers. And as long as that remains consistent, you have something that's really usable in assessing effort and a quantifiable value that you can divide by in this prioritization RICE score, right? So in the last video, I said I would share a story about something that happened to me in assessing feasibility. And I think this should paint a really good picture in understanding effort and constraints, because constraints are something that people often forget about, right? When you're developing a product from scratch, it's kind of a green field, green pasture scenario where you can build things however you want, right? But once you start making decisions, building out a product, you may make decisions that are not optimal in order to get something out quicker or get something built quicker. And what happens is you build something called technical debt, meaning if you don't go back and fix those things you did and do them the right way, and just like monetary debt, it's going to compound and cause bigger problems later. So with that in mind, here's something that happened to me. I was working on a feature. So as we sit, it's October 2020. I was developing a feature, I don't know, a few months ago. So it's relatively recent. And the reach was clear, how many users this would impact, but also how this would open up our opportunity to reach an audience that we were kind of underserving today, right? So in theory, if we do this, we could serve our current audience better, but also attract a larger audience to us. The impact was pretty big in a number of ways. It would impact our core web product and our mobile product, and it would really be the first time we would get into reports, right? So we don't have a strong reporting capability in our product, at least not a modern one. We have a pretty old school one that could be more usable, I'll say. And so this was would have been our first attempt at a more modern report that lived inside of the product, that could still be exported, but was very usable at the user's fingertips, right? So in the initial effort, very early on, I went to our developers, made sure that we had that data available. I had the designs made, the stories and acceptance criteria defined of what we needed. We had a full high fidelity prototype that we went through a series of lo-fi tests, all the things that you've done in this project. We did this to a T, right? User research, we validated usability, we validated desirability. We got really good feedback in how much this would help in a lot of areas. And the data was there. We have it in our system, the data that needed to show up on the front end to the user. And the front end developer had the work scoped out and how much effort it would take. And hey, the data was already being passed through our APIs from the database. So what could go wrong, right? Well, turns out we didn't look as deep into it as we probably should have. I probably didn't ask enough questions, and now I know questions I should be asking. But what happened was, as that data is being passed through the API, the way that the APIs were originally developed were not developed in mind to pass data to the front end, right? A lot of times we build, reports on the back end and present them in a certain way, and not intended to do what I wanted to have done or what the user needed to have done with a end product report, right? And so that was a constraint for us. The fact that our APIs were not developed in a way that could easily pass the data through to the front end was and is a problem, right? And so that is a good example of technical debt and a constraint to say that we're going to have to go refactor or construct the API to make it more useful for what we want to do going forward. And without understanding that constraint, we misjudged effort, and we had already scoped around the effort that we thought it would take. And so since we had that level of definition with other resources we had and other priorities we had, we allocated resources to other priorities, thinking that this effort would only take so much time, right? Whenever we found that new constraint, it expanded the scope of the effort, became a blocker for what we wanted to do, and resources who needed to make this change on the API were already assigned to other projects that had been prioritized. So it killed this effort, and we had clients and partners expecting this thing to be done, and it fell flat because we didn't properly understand the full amount of effort that went into it. And so eventually we'll go and fix it, and we'll get the thing out the door, but it's caused quite a setback, right? And that's what I want you to be able to avoid whenever you start out in product management. Is like, you're going to be excited, you're going to have a ton of energy, and you do need to step back and make sure you're asking enough questions, so that way your first feature effort or whatever effort you're taking on can go through and have that success and start your career off on the right foot. Um, and you know, I've always heard that the sign of great leadership is asking great questions. And in product, whether you're an individual contributor or a product leader, you're a leader in the organization because you have influence in a large way. And so as a leader, I highly encourage you to make sure you're asking a lot of questions and a lot of good questions. And effort is one of those areas where you're going to have to ask a lot of questions, make your intent known, and make sure that the due diligence is done going into it. So I hope my story helps you to avoid similar mistakes. Even though they were unintentional, mistakes happen. So with that, let's move on to writing user stories. So I mentioned it before when I was telling you my story, that we had designs ready, we had user stories and acceptance criteria ready. Well, you might have been asking, if you're not familiar with this already, what are user stories and what is acceptance criteria? And if you're asking that question, we're about to get to that. If you already know what that is, hopefully you'll learn something out of these videos that'll help you write better user stories and better acceptance criteria. So I'll see you there.